A reading of Oliver Twist by Todd. Chapter 1 Treats of the place where Oliver Twist was born and of the circumstances attending his birth. Among other public buildings in a certain town, which for many reasons it will be prudent to refrain from mentioning, and to which I will assign no fictitious name, there is one anciently common to most towns, great or small, to wit, a workhouse. And in this workhouse was born, on a day and date which I need not trouble myself to repeat, inasmuch as it can be of no possible consequence to the reader in this stage of the business, at all events, the item of mortality whose name is prefixed to the head of this chapter. For a long time after it was ushered into this world of sorrow and trouble by the parish surgeon, it remained a matter of considerable doubt whether the child would survive to bear any name at all. In which case, it is somewhat more than probable that these memoirs would never have appeared, or, if they had, that being compromised within a couple of pages, they would have possessed the inestimable merit of being the most concise and faithful specimen of biography extant in literature of any age or country. Although I am not disposed to maintain that the being born in a workhouse is in itself the most fortunate and enviable circumstance that can possibly befell a human being, I do mean to say that in this particular instance, it was the best thing for Oliver Twist that could, by possibility, had occurred. The fact is that there was considerable difficulty in inducing Oliver to take upon himself the office of respiration, a troublesome practice, but one which custom has rendered necessary to our easy existence. And for some time he lay gasping on a little flock mattress, rather unequally poised between this world and the next, the balance being decidedly in favor of the latter. Now, if, during this brief period, Oliver had been surrounded by careful grandmothers, anxious aunts, experienced nurses, and doctors of profound wisdom, he would most inevitably and indubitably have been killed in no time. There being nobody by, however, but a pauper old woman, was rendered rather misty by an unwonted allowance of beer, and a parish surgeon who did such things matters by contract. Oliver and nature fought out the point between them. The result was that, after a few struggles, Oliver breathed, sneezed, and proceeded to advertise to the inmates of the workhouse the fact of a new burden having been imposed upon the parish, by setting up as loud a cry as could reasonably have been expected from a male infant who had not been possessed of that very useful appendage, a voice, for a much longer space of time than 3 minutes and a quarter. As Oliver gave this first proof of the free and proper action of his lungs, the patchwork coverlet which was carelessly flung over the iron bedstead rustled. The pale face of a young woman was raised feebly from the pillow, and a faint voice imperfectly articulated the words, "Let me see the child and die." The surgeon had been sitting with his face turned towards the fire, giving the palms of his hands a warm and a rub alternately. As the young woman spoke, he rose and, advancing to the bed's head, said, with more kindness than might have been expected of him, "Oh, you must not talk about dying yet." "Lord bless her heart, dear heart, no," interposed the nurse, hastily depositing in her pocket a green glass bottle, the contents of which she had been tasting and quaffing with evident satisfaction. "Lord bless her dear heart. When she has lived as long as I have, sir, and had 13 children of her own, and all of them dead except two, and them in the workus with me, she'll know better than to take on in that way. Bless her dear heart. Think if it was to be a mother. There's a dear lamb, though." Apparently, this consolatory perspective of a mother's prospects failed in producing its due effect. The patient shook her head and stretched out her hand towards the child. The surgeon deposited it in her arms. She imprinted her cold, white lips passionately on its forehead, passing her hands over her face, gazed widely around, shuddered, fell back, and died. They chafed her breasts, hands, and temples, but the blood had stopped forever. They talked of hope and comfort. They had been strangers too long. "It's all over, Mr. Thingamy," said the surgeon at last. "Ah, poor dear, so it is," said the nurse, picking up the cork of the green bottle, which had fallen on the pillow as she stooped to take up the child. "Poor dear. You needn't mind sitting up to me. If the child cries, nurse," said the surgeon, putting on his gloves with great deliberation, "it's very likely it will be troublesome. Give it a little gruel if it is." He put on his hat, and, pausing by the bedside on his way to the door, added, "She was a good-looking girl, too. Where did she come from?" "She was brought here last night," replied the old woman, "by the overseer's order. She was found lying in the street. She had walked some distance, for her shoes were worn to pieces. But where she came from, or where she was going to, nobody knows." The surgeon leaned over the body and raised the left hand. "The old story," he said, shaking his head. "No wettering, I see. Ah, good night." The medical gentleman walked away to dinner, and the nurse, having once more applied herself to the green bottle, sat down in a low chair before the fire and proceeded to dress the infant. What an excellent example of the power of dress young Oliver was. Wrapped up in the blanket which had hitherto formed his only covering, he might have been the child of a nobleman or a beggar. It would have been hard for the haughtiest stranger to assign him his proper station in society, but now that he was enveloped in the old calico robes which had grown yellow in the same service, he was badged and ticketed and found to his place at once. A parish child, the orphan of a workhouse, the humble, half-starved drudge, to be cuffed and buffeted through the world, despised by all and pitied by none. Oliver cried lustfully. If he could have known that he was an orphan, left to the tender mercies of churchwardens and overseers, perhaps he would have cried the louder. Chapter 2 treats of Oliver's twist growth, education, and board. "For the next 8 or 10 months, sir." Although this invitation was accompanied with a courtesy that might have softened the heart of a churchwarden, it by no means mollified the beadle. "Do you think this respectful or proper conduct, Mrs. Man?" inquired Mr. Bumbles, grasping his cane. "To keep the parish offers awaiting at your garden gate, when they come here upon parochial business with the parochial orphans? Are you aware, Mrs. Man, that you are, as I may say, a parochial delegate and a stipendiary?" "I'm sure, Mr. Bumble, that I was only a telling her one or two of the dear children as is so fond of you that was you were coming," replied Miss Man with great humility. Mr. Bumble had a great idea of his oratorical powers and his importance. He had displayed the one and vindicated the other. He relaxed. "Well, well, Mrs. Man," he replied in a calmer tone. "It may be as you say. It may be. Lead the way in, Mrs. Man, for I come on business and have something to say." Mrs. Man ushered the beadle into a small parlor with a brick floor, placed a seat for him, and officiously deposited his cocked hat and cane on the table before him. Mr. Bumble wiped from his forehead the perspiration which his walk had engendered, glanced complacently at the cocked hat, and smiled. Yes, he smiled. Beadles are but men, and Mr. Bumble smiled. "Now, don't be offended at what I'm going to say," observed Miss Man with captivating sweetness. "You've had a long walk, you know, or I wouldn't mention it. Now you will take a little drop of something, Mr. Bumble?" "Not a drop, nor a drop," said Mr. Bumble, waving his right hand at a dignified but placid manner. "I think you will," said Mrs. Mann, who had noticed the tone of the refusal and the gesture that accompanied it. Just a little drop, with a little cold water, and a lump of sugar. Mr. Bumble coughed. Now, just a little drop, said Mrs. Mann persuasively. What is it? Inquired the beadle. Why, it's what I'm obliged to keep a little of in the house, put into the blessed infant Staffy, when they ain't well, Mr. Bumble, replied Mrs. Mann. She opened a corner cupboard and took down a bottle and glass. It's gin. I'll not deceive you, Mr. Ben. It's gin. Do you give the children Daffy, Mrs. Mann? Inquired Bumble, following with his eyes the interesting processing of mixing. Oh, bless 'em, that I do, dear as it is, replied the nurse. I couldn't see him suffer before my very eyes, you know, sir. No, said Mr. Bumble approvingly. No, you could not. You are a human woman, Mrs. Mann. Here, she set down the glass. I shall take the early opportunity of mentioning it to the board, Mrs. Mann. He drew it towards him. You feel as a mother, Mrs. Mann? He stirred the gin and water. I drink your health with cheerfulness, Mrs. Mann, and he swallowed half of it. And now about business, said the beadle, taking out a leathern pocketbook. The child that was half baptized, Oliver Twist, is 9 years old today. Bless him, interposed Mrs. Mann, inflaming her left eye at the corner of her apron. And notwithstanding an offered reward of £10, which was afterwards increased to £20, notwithstanding the most superlative, and I might say supernatural, exertions on the part of this parish, said Bumble, we have never been able to discover who his father, or what was his mother's settlement, name, or condition. Miss Mann raised her hands in astonishment, but added, after a moment's reflection, how comes he have to be named at all, then? The beadle drew himself up with great pride and said, I'm winted it. You, Mr. Bumble? I, Mrs. Mann. We name our fondlings in alphabetical order. Last name was a S. Swooble, I named him. This was a Twist, I named him. The next ones will be Unwin, and the next Vilkins. I've got names ready-made to the end of the alphabet and all the way through again when we come to Z. Why, you're quite a literary character, sir, said Mrs. Mann. Well, well, said the beadle, evidently gratified at the compliment. Perhaps I may be, Mrs. Mann. He finished the gin and water and added, Oliver being now too old to remain here, the board have determined to have him back into the house. I came up myself to take him there, so let me see him at once. I'll fetch him directly, said Mrs. Mann, leaving the room for that purpose. Oliver, having had by this time as much of the outer coat of dirt which encrusted his face and hands removed, as could be scrubbed off in one washing, was led in the room by his benevolent protectress. Make a bow to the gentleman, Oliver, said Mrs. Mann. Oliver made a bow, which was divided between the beadle on the chair and the cocked hat on the table. Will you go along with me, Oliver, said Mr. Beadle in a majestic voice. Oliver was about to say that he would go along with anybody with great readiness, when, glancing upward, he caught sight of Mrs. Mann, who had got behind the beadle's chair, and was shaking her fist at him with the furious countenance. He took the hint at once, for the fist had been too impressed upon his body not to be deeply pressed upon his recollection. Will she go with me? Inquired poor Oliver. No, she can't, replied Mr. Bumble, but she'll come and see you sometimes. This was no very great consultation with the child. Young as he was, however, he had sense enough to make a faint feeling great regrets going away. It was no very difficult matter for the boy to call tears into his eyes. Hunger and recent ill usage are greatest sins if you want to cry. And Oliver cried very naturally indeed. Miss Mann gave him 1,000 embraces. And what Oliver wanted a great deal more, a piece of bread and butter, lest he should seem too hungry when he got to the workhouse. With a slice of bread in his hand and a little brown cloth parish cap on his head, Oliver was then led away by Mr. Bumble from the wretched home where one kind word or look had never lightened the gloom of his infant years. And yet he burst into an agony of childish grief as the cottage gate closed after him. Wretched as were the little companions in misery he was leaving behind, they were the only friends he had ever known, and a sense of his loneliness in the great wide world sang in the child's heart for the first time. Miss Bumble walked in with long strides. Little Oliver, firmly grasping his gold-laced cuff, trotted beside him, inquiring at the end of every quarter of a mile where they were nearly there. To these interrogations, Mr. Bumble returned with very brief and snappish replies. For the temporary blandness which gin and water wings in some bosoms had by this time evaporated, and he was once again a beetle. Oliver had not been within the walls of the workhouse a quarter of an hour, and had scarcely completed the demolition of a second slice of bread, when Mr. Bumble, who had handed him over to the care of an old woman, returned, and telling him it was a board night, informed him that the board said he was to appear before it forthwith. Not having a very clearly defined notion of what a live board was, Oliver was rather astounded by this intelligence, and was not quite certain whether or not he ought to laugh or cry. He had no time to think about the matter, however, for Mr. Bumble gave him a tap on the head with his cane to wake him up, and another on the back to make him lively, and bidding him to follow, conducted him into a large whitewashed room where 8 or 10 fat gentlemen were sitting around a table. At the top of the table, seated in an armchair rather higher than the rest, was a particularly fat gentleman with a very round, red face. "Bow to the board," said Bumble. Oliver brushed away 2 or 3 tears that were lingering in his eyes, and seeing no board but the table, fortunately bowed to that. "What's your name, boy?" said the gentleman in the high chair. Oliver was frightened at the sight of so many gentlemen, which made him tremble. The beadle gave another tap behind, which made him cry. These two causes made him answer in a very low and hesitating voice, whereupon a gentleman in a white waistcoat said he was a fool, which was a capital way of raising his spirits and putting him quite at ease. "Boy," said the gentleman in the high chair, "listen to me. You know you're an orphan, I suppose?" "What's that, sir?" inquired poor Oliver. "The boy's a fool. I thought he was," said the gentleman in the whitish waistcoat. "Hush," said the gentleman who had spoken first. "You know you've got no father and mother, and they were bought by the parish, don't you?" "Yes, sir," replied Oliver, weeping bitterly. "What are you crying for?" inquired the man in the white waistcoat. "Be sure it was very extraordinary." "What could the boy be crying for?" "I hope you said your prayers every night," said another gentleman in a gruff voice, "and pray for the people who feed you and take care of you, like a Christian." "Yes, sir," stammered the boy. The gentleman who spoke last was unconsolably right. It would have been very like a Christian, and a marvelously good Christian too, if Oliver had prayed for the people who fed and took care of him, but he hadn't, because nobody had taught him. "Well, you've come here to be educated and taught a useful trade," said the red-faced gentleman in the high chair. "She'll begin to pick oakum tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock," added the surly one in the white waistcoat. For the combination of both these blessings and one simple process of picking oakum, Oliver bowed low by the direction of the beadle, and was then hurried away to a large ward, where, on a rough, hard bed, he sobbed himself to sleep. What a novel illustration of the tender laws of England! They let the paupers go to sleep. Poor Oliver! He little thought as he lay sleeping and happy and conscious all around him, that the board had that very day arrived at a decision which exercised the most material influence over all his future fortunes. But they had, and this was it. The members of this board were very sage, deep, philosophical men, and when they came to turn their attention to the workhouse, they found out at once what ordinary folks would never have discovered. The poor people liked it. It was a regular place of public entertainment for the poorer classes. A tavern where there was nothing to pay, a public breakfast, dinner, tea, and supper all the year round, a brick-and-mortar Elysium where it was all play and no work. "Who," said the board, looking very knowing, "we are the fellows to set this to rights. Stop it all, in no time." So they established a rule that all poor people should have the alternative, for they would compel nobody, not they, of being starved by a gradual process in the house, or by a quick one out of it. With this view, they contracted with the water slave an unlimited supply of water, and with a corn factory to support periodically small quantities of oatmeal, and issued 3 meals of thin gruel a day, with an onion twice a week and half a roll Sundays. They made a great many other wise and humane regulations, having reference to the ladies, which is not necessary to repeat, kindly overtook to divorce poor married people, in consequences of the great expense they sued in Dr. Collins, and instead of compelling a man to support his family, as they'd have there done, took his family away from him and made him a bachelor. There's no so many applications for relief under these last two heads might have started up in all class society if it had not been coupled with the workhouse, but the board were long-headed men, and it provided for this difficulty. The relief was inseparable from the workhorse and the gruel, and that frightened people. For the first 6 months after Oliver Twist was removed, the system was in full operation. It was rather expensive at first, in consequence of the increase in the undertaker's bill and the necessity of taking the clothes of all the paupers, which fluttered loosely on their wasted, shrunken forms after a week or two's gruel. But the number of workhouse inmates got thin as well as the paupers, and the board were in ecstasies. The room in which the boys were fed was a large stone hall, with a copper one at end, at which the master, dressed in an apron for the purpose, and assisted by one or two women, ladled the gruel at meal times. Of this festive composition, each boy had one portion, and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The bowls never wanted washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again, and when they had performed this operation, which never took very long, the spoons being nearly as large as the bowls, they would sit staring at the copper with such eager eyes, as if they could have devoured the very bricks of which it was composed, employing themselves, meanwhile, in sucking their fingers most assiduously with the view of catching up on each stray splashes of gruel that might have been cast therein. Boys have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got so voracious and wild with hunger that one boy, who was tall for his age and had been used to that sort of thing, of course father had kept a small shop, hinted darkly to his companions that unless he had another basin of gruel per diem, he was afraid he might some night happen to eat the boy who slept next to him, who happened to be a weakly youth of tender age. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they implicitly believed him. A council was held. Lots were cast who should walk up to the master after supper that day and ask for more. And it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself at the copper. His pauper assistants ranged themselves behind him. The gruel was served out, and a long race was set over the short commons. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose from the table and, advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed at his own timidity, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds, and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were players with wonder, the boys with fear. "What?" said the master, linked in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master began to blow at Oliver's head with a ladle, pinning him in his arm, and shrieked aloud for the beetle. The board were sitting in solemn conclave when Mr. Bumble rushed to the room in great excitement, and addressing the gentleman in the high chair, said, "Mr. Limpkins, I beg your pardon, sir. Oliver Twist has asked for more." There was a general start. Horror was depicted on every countenance. "For more?" said Mr. Limpkins. "Compose yourself, Bumble, and answer me distinctly. Do I understand they asked for more after he had eaten the silver allotted by the dietary?" "He did, sir," replied Bumble. "That boy'll be hung," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. "I know that boy'll be hung." Nobody converted the prophetic gentleman's opinion. An animated discussion took place. All was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning pasted on the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. In other words, £5 and Oliver Twist were offered to any man or woman who wanted entrance to any trade, business, or calling. I never was more convinced of anything in my life," said the gentleman in the white waistcoat, as he knocked at the gate and read the bill next morning. I never was more convinced of anything in my life than I am that the boy will come to be hung. As I purpose to show in the sequel whether the white waistcoat Jim was right or not, I should perhaps mar the interest of this narrative. Supposing it to possess any at all, if I ventured to hint just yet whether the life of Oliver Twist had this violent termination or no. Chapter 3 relates how Oliver Twist was very nearly getting a place which would not have been a sinecure. For a week after the commission of the impish and profane offense of asking for more, Oliver remained a close prisoner in the dark and solitary room to which he had been consigned by the wisdom and mercy of the board. It appears, at first sight, not unreasonable to suppose that, if he had entertained a becoming feeling of respect for the prediction of the gentleman in the white waistcoat, he would have established that sage individual's prophetic character, once and forever, by trying one end of his pocket-handkerchief to a hook in the wall, and attaching himself to the other. To the performance of this feat, however, there was one obstacle, namely, that pocket-handkerchiefs being the side articles of luxury had been, for all future times and ages, removed from the noses of paupers by the express order of the board, in council assembled, solemnly given and pronounced under their hands and seals. There is still a greater obstacle in Oliver's youth and childness. He only cried bitterly all day, and when the long dismissal night came on, spread his little hands before his eyes to shut the darkness, and crouching in the corridor tried to sleep, ever and anon walking with a start and tremble, and drawing himself closer and closer to the wall, as if to feel even its cold harsh surface for protection in the gloom and loneliness which surrounded him. Let it not be supposed by enemies of the system that, during the period of his solitary incarceration, Oliver was denied the benefit of exercise, the pleasures of society, or the advantages of religious consolation. As for exercise, it was nice cold weather, and he was allowed to perform his ablutions every morning under the pump in a stone yard in the presence of Mr. Bumble, who prevented his catching cold and caused a tingling sensation to pervade his frame by repeated applications of the cane. As for society, he was carried every other day into the hall where the boys dined, and there socially flogged as a public warning and example. And so far from being denied the advantages of religious consolation, he was kicked into the same apartment every evening at prayer time, and there permitted to listen to, in council's mind with, a general supplication of the boys, containing a special clause, there inserted by authority of the board, in which they entreated to be made good, virtuous, content, and obedient, and to be guarded from the sins and vices of Oliver Twist, whom the supplication distinctly set forth to be under the exclusive patronage and protection of powers of wickedness, an article direct from the manufacturer of the very devil himself. It chances one morning, while Oliver's affairs were in this suspicious and comfortable state, that Mr. Gimfield, chimney sweep, went his own way down the High Street, deeply conjugating in his mind his ways and means of paying certain arrears of rent, for which his landlord had become rather pressing. Mr. Gamfield's most sanguine estimate of his finances could not raise them within full £5, the desired amount, and in a species of arithmetical desperation, he is alternately clutching his brains and his donkey when passing the workhouse. His eyes encountered the bell on the gate. "Woo-hoo!" said Mr. Gamfield to the donkey. The donkey was in a state of profound abstraction, wondering, probably, whether he was destined to be arrayed with a cabbage stalk or two when he had disposed of the 2 sacks of suet which the little cart was laden. So, without noticing the word of command, he jogged onward. Mr. Gamfield growled a fierce imprecation on the donkey generally, but more particularly on his eyes, and running after him, stowed a blow on his head, which would inevitably have been in a school but a donkey's. Then, catching hold of the bridle, he gave his jaw a sharp wrench, by way of gentle reminder that he was not his own master, and by these means turned him around. He then gave him another blow on the head, just to stun him till he came back again. Having completed these arrangements, he walked to the gate to read the bill. The gentleman with the white waistcoat was standing at the gate with his hands behind him, after having delivered himself of some profound sentiments in the boardroom. Having witnessed the little dispute between Mr. Gamfield and Donkey, he smiled joyously when the person came up to read the bill, for he saw at once that Mr. Gamfield was exactly the sort of master Oliver Twist wanted. Mr. Gamfield smiled too, as he perused the document, for £5 was just the sum he had been wishing for, and as to the boy which was encumbered, Mr. Gamfield, knowing what the dietary of the workhouse was, well knew it'd be a nice small pattern, just the very thing for register stoves. So, he spelt the bill through again, from beginning to end, and then touching his fur cap in token of humility, accosted the gentleman in the white waistcoat. This here boy, sir, what the Paris wants to pretense, said Mr. Gamfield. Aye, my man, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat with a consenting smile. What of him? If the Paris would like him to learn a right pleasant trade, and a good, spectable chimney sweeping business, said Mr. Gamfield, I want some pretentious and ready to take him. Walk in, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. Mr. Gamfield, having lingered behind to give the donkey a blow on the head and the wrench the jaw as a caution not to run away in his absence, followed the gentleman with the white waistcoat into the room where Oliver had first seen him. It's a nasty trade, said Mr. Limpkins when Gamfield had again stated his wish. Young boys have been smothered in chimney before now, said another gentleman. That's the cost they down to the straw for. They lit in the chimney to make them come down again. So that's all smoke and no blaze. Where smoke ain't no use at all, that Bill. For he saw once in Michigan exactly. Make a boy come down for only sides him to sleep, and that's not what he likes. That's what he likes. Boys is very obstinate, and we're lazy, gentlemen, and there's nothing like a good hot blaze to make him come down with a run. It's humane too, gentlemen, if they're stuck in the chimney, roasting their feet makes them struggle to extract themselves. The gentleman in the white waistcoat appeared very much amused by this explanation, but his mirth was speedily checked by a look from Mr. Limpkins. The board then proceeded to converse among themselves for a few minutes, when in so low a tone that the words saving of expenditure looked well in the accounts, have a printed report published, were alone audible. These only chanced to be heard indeed, or account of their being very frequently repeated with great emphasis. At length the whispering ceased, and the members of the board, having resumed their seats in their solemnity, Mr. Limpkins said, We've considered your proposition, and we don't approve of it. Not at all, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. Decidedly not, added the other members. As Mr. Gamfield did happen to labor since flight and chase having bruised at 3 or 4 boys to death already, it occurred to him that the board had perhaps in some unaccountable freak taken into their heads that this extreme insurance ought to influence their proceedings. It was very unlike their general mode of doing business if they had, but still, as he had no particular wish to revive the rumor, he twisted his cap in his hands and walked slowly from the table. So, you won't let me have 'em, gentlemen, said Mr. Gamfield, pausing near the door. No, replied Mr. Limpkins, at least, as it's a nasty business. We think you ought to take something less than the premium we offered. Mr. Gamfield's countenance brightened, as with a quick sweep returned to the table and said, Well, I'll get what I'll give you? Gentlemen, come on, don't be too hard, poor man. What will you give? I should say £3 was plenty, said Mr. Limpkins. 10 shillings too much, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. Come, said Gamfield. Say £4, gentlemen, say £4. You've got room for good all. There. £3.10, repeated Mr. Limpkins firmly. Come, I'll split the difference, gentlemen. £3.15. Not a farthing more, was the firm reply of Mr. Limpkins. You're desperate hard on me, gentlemen, said Gamfield. Pooh, nonsense, said the gentleman in the white waistcoat. He'd be cheap with nothing at all as a premium. Take him, you silly fellow. He's just the boy for you. He wants the stick now and then. It'll do him good, and his boys need not come very expensive, for he hasn't been over since he was born. Mr. Gamfield gave an arch look at the faces around the table, answering a smile, then gradually bumped to a smile himself. The bargain was made. Mr. Bumble was at once sure that Oliver Twist and his indentures were to be conveyed for the magistrate for signature and approval that very afternoon. In pursuance of this determination, little Oliver, to his excessive astonishment, was released from bondage in order to put himself into a clean shirt. He had already achieved this very unusual gymnastics performance when Mr. Bumble brought him, with his own hands, a basin of gruel and the holiday allowance of 2 ounces and a quarter of bread. At this tremendous sight, Oliver began to cry very pettishly, thinking, not unnaturally, that the board must have determined to kill him for some useful purpose, or they were going to fat him up in that way. Don't make your eyes red, Oliver, but eat your food and be thankful, said Mr. Bumble in tone of impressive popsy. You're going to be a prince, Oliver. Prince, sir?
said the child, trembling. Yes, Oliver, said Mr. Bumble, the kind and blessed gentleman which is so many parents to you, Oliver, and we have none of your own, are going to pretend you into set you up in life and make a man of you. All the respects to the parish is £3.10. £3.10, Oliver. 70 shillings, 146 pences, and all for a naughty orphan which nobody can't love. As Mr. Oliver paused to take breaths, everything expressed in an awful voice, tears rolled down the poor soul's face, and he sobbed barely. Come, said Mr. Bumble, somewhat less pompously, for it was gratifying to his feelings to observe the effect his elegance had produced. Come, Oliver, wipe your eyes with the cuffs of your jacket, and don't cry into your gruel. That's a very foolish action, Oliver. It told me what it was, for there's quite enough water in it already. On their way to the magistrate, Mr. Bumble assured Oliver that all he would have to do would be to look very happy and say, when the gentleman asked him if he wanted to be a princess, they should like it very much indeed. But with which injunctions Oliver promised to obey. But rather, as Mr. Bumble threw in a gentle hint that if he found either particular, there is no telling what would be done to him. When they arrived at the office, he was shut in a little room by himself, and Mossburn was willing to stay there until he came back to fetch him. There the boy remained, with a palpitating heart for half an hour, at the expiration of which time Mr. Bumble thrust in his head, unadorned with the cocked hat, and said aloud, Now, Oliver, my dear, come to the gentleman. As Mr. Bumble said this, he put on a grim and threatening look, and added in a low voice, Mind what I told you, you young rascal. Oliver started instantly, and Mr. Bumble faced this somewhat country style of address. But that gentleman prevented his offering any remark thereupon by leading him at once to an adjoining room, the door of which was open. It was a large room with a great window. Behind a desk sat two old gentlemen with powdered heads, one of whom was reading the newspaper while the other was perusing, with the aid of a pair of tortoise-shell spectacles, a small piece of parchment which lay before him. Mr. Limpkins was standing in front of the desk on one side, and Mr. Ganfeld, with a partially washed face, and on the other, while two or three bluff-looking men in top boots were lounging about. The old gentleman with the spectacles gradually dozed off over a little bit of parchment, and there was a short pause after Alton said in front of the desk. This is the boy, your worship, said Mr. Bumble. The old gentleman who was reading the newspaper raised his head for a moment and pulled the other gentleman by the sleeve, whereupon the last mentioned old gentleman woke up. Oh, is this the boy? Said the old gentleman. This is him, sir, replied Mr. Bumble. Bow to the magistrate, my dear. Oliver roused himself and made his best obeisance. He had been wondering, with his eyes fixed on the magistrate's powder, whether all the boards were born with that white stuff on their heads and were boards from thenceforth on that account. Well, said the old gentleman, I suppose he's fond of chimney sweeping. He dotes on it, your worship, replied Bumble, giving Oliver a slight pinch, and they had better not say he didn't. And he'll be a sweeper, inquired the old gentleman. If he was to bind to any other trade tomorrow, he'd run away simultaneous, your worship, replied Bumble. And this man's to be his master, you, sir? You treat him well and feed him and do all that sort of thing, will you? Said the old gentleman. When I says I will, I means I will, replied Mr. Ganfeld doggedly. You're a rough speaker, my friend, but you're looking honest, open-hearted man, said the old gentleman, turning his spectacles in the direction of the candidate for Oliver's premium, whose villainous conscience was a regular stamp receipt for cruelty. But the magistrate was half blind, half childish, so he couldn't reasonably expect to discern what other people did. I hope I am, sir, said Shameful with an ugly leer. I have no doubt you are, my friend, replied the old gentleman, fixing his focus more firmly on the mount for the inkstand. It was the critical moment of Oliver's fate. If the inkstand had been where the old gentleman thought was, he would have dipped his pen to it and signed the indentures, and Oliver would have been straightway hurried off. But it chanced to be immediately under his nose. It followed as a matter of course. They looked all over the desk for it without finding it, and happening in the course of his search to look straight for him, his gaze encountered the pale and terrified face of Oliver Twist, who, despite all the admiratory looks and pinches of Bumble, was regarding the repulsive countenance of his future master with a mingled expression of horror and fear too palpable to be mistaken ever by a half-blind magistrate. The old gentleman stopped, laid down his pen, and looked from Oliver to Mr. Limpkins, who attempted to take snuff with a cheerful and unconcerned aspect. My boy, said the old gentleman, you look pale and alarmed. What is the matter? Stand a little way from him, Beadle, said the other magistrate, laying aside the paper and leaning forward with an expression of interest. Now, boy, tell us what's the matter. Don't be afraid. Oliver fell on his knees and, clasping his hands together, prayed that they would order him back to the dark room, that they would starve him, beat and kill him if they pleased, rather than send away with that dreadful man. Well, said Mr. Bumble, raising his hands and eyes with most impressive solemnity. Well, of all the awful and designing words that I ever see, Oliver, you are the most barefacedest. Hold your tongue, Beetle, said the second old gentleman, when Mr. had given vent to his compound adjective. I beg your worship's pardon, said Mr. Bumble, incredulous of having heard right. Did your worship speak to me? Yes, hold your tongue. Mr. Bumble was stupefied with astonishment. A Beetle ordered to hold his tongue? A moral revolution. The old gentleman and the terror suspect looked at his companion. He nodded significantly. We refuse to sanction the indentures, said the old gentleman, tossing aside the piece of parchment as he spoke. I hope, Sir Mr. Limpkins, I hope the magistrates will not form the opinion that the authorities have been guilty of any improper conduct on the unsupported testimony of a child. The magistrates are not called upon to pronounce any opinion on the matter, said the same old gentleman sharply. Take the boy back to the workhouse and treat him kindly. He seems to want it. That same evening, the gentleman in the white waistcoat was publicly and silently affirmed, not only that Oliver would be hung, but that he would be drawn and quartered into the bargain. Mr. Bumble shook his head with gloomy mystery and said he wished he might come to good. Whereunto Mr. Gamfield replied that he wished he might come to him, which all three agreed with the Beetle in most matters, would seem to be a wish of a totally opposite description. The next morning, the Powell once informed that Oliver was again to let that and £5 paid anybody who would take possession of him. Chapter 4. Oliver, being offered another place, makes his first entry into the public life. In great families, when an advantageous place can't be obtained, either in possession, reversion, remainder, or expediency, for the young man who's growing up, it is a very general custom to send him to sea. The board, intimidation of so wide and salutary an example, took counsel together on the expediency of shipping off Oliver Twist, in some small trading vessel bound to a good, healthy port. This suggested itself as the very best thing that could possibly be done with him. The probability that the skipper would flog him to death in a plaintive mood some day after dinner, would knock his brains out with an iron bar. Most pastimes being, as is pretty generally well known, a very favorite and common recreation among gentlemen of that class. The more the case presented itself to the board, in this point of view, the more manifold the advantage of the step period, so they came to the conclusion that the only way of providing for all effectively was to send him to sea without delay. Mr. Bumble had been dispatched to make various preliminary inquiries, with the view of finding out some captain or other who wanted a Canmore without any friends, and was returning to the workhorse to communicate the result of his mission, when he encountered at the gate no less person than Mr. Sorby, the perical undertaker. Mr. Sorby was a tall, gaunt, large-jointed man, attired in a suit of threadbare black, with darned cotton stockings of the same color, and shoes to answer. His features were not naturally intended to wear a smiling aspect, but he was in general rather given to professional jousting. His step was elastic, and his face betokened inward pleasantry as he advanced to Mr. Bumble and shook him cordially by the hand. I have taken the measure of the two women that died last night, Mr. Bumble, said the undertaker. You'll make your fortune, Mr. Sorby, said the Beetle, as he thrust his thumb forward into the profound snuff box of the undertaker, which was an ingenious little model of a patent cotton. I say you'll make your fortune, Mr. Sorby, repeated Mr. Bumble, tapping the undertaker on the shoulder in a friendly manner with his cane. Think so, said the undertaker in a tone which half admitted and half disputed the probability of the event. The price allowed by the boards very small, Mr. Bumble. So are the coffins, replied the Beetle, with precisely the nearest approach to a laugh as the great official ought to indulge in. Mr. Sorby was much tickled at this, as of course he ought to be, and laughed a long time without cessation. Well, Mr. Bumble, he said at length, there's no denying that, since the new system of feeding has come in, the coffins are somewhat nearer and more swell than they used to be. But we must have some profit, Mr. Bumble. Well-seasoned timber is an expensive article, sir, and all the iron handles come by canal from Birmingham. Well, said Mr. Bumble, every trade has its drawbacks. A fair profit is, of course, allowable. Of course, replied the undertaker.
If I don't get a profit upon this or that particular action, why make it up in the long run, you see? Just so, said Mr. Bumble. Though I must say, continued the Undertaker, resuming the current of observations which the Beale had interpreted, though I must say, Mr. Bumble, that I have to contend against one of very great advantages, which is that all the stout people go off to the quickest. The Beale would have been better off and have paid rates for many years. Well, first to sink when they come into the house, and let me tell you, Mr. Bell, that 3 or 4 inches over your one's calculations make a great hole in one's profits, especially when especially as a family to provide for, sir. As Mr. Shelby said this, with becoming indignation of his loose man, as Mr. Bell felt that rather tended to convey a reflection on the horror of the partners. The latter gentleman thought it was vital to change the subject. Oliver's being uppermost in his mind, he made him this thing. By the by, said Mr. Bumble, you don't know anybody who wants a bully, do you? Imperial princess, who is at present a deadweight, a millstone, as I might say, round the prickle throat. Liberal terms, Mr. Strawberry, liberal terms. As Mr. Bumble spoke, he raised his cane to the bill above him, and gave 3 distinct raps on the words £5, which were printed therein in Roman capitals of gigantic size. God so, said the Undertaker, taking Mr. Bumble by the glint edge lapel of his official coat. That's just the very thing I wanted to speak to you about. You know, dear me, what a very elegant button this is, Mr. Bumble. I never noticed it before. Yes, I think it's rather pretty, said the Beadle, glancing purposely downward to the large brass buttons which embellished his coat. The dye is the same as the Perkle seal, the Good Samaritan healing the sick and bruised man. The board presented to me on New Year's Eve, Mr. Fry put it on. I remember the first night I attended the inquest of that reduced tradesman who died in a doorway at midnight. I recollect, said the Undertaker, the jury brought in, died from exposure to cold and want of the common necessities of life, didn't they? Mr. Bumble nodded, and they made it a special verdict, I think, said the Undertaker. But I have some words to the effect that the officer had foolery with the bill. If the board attended to all the nonsense that ignorant journeymen talk, they'd have enough to do. Very true, said the Undertaker. They would indeed. Juries, said Mr. Bumble, grasping his cane tightly as he wouldn't warning to a possession. Juries indicated vulgar, groveling wretches. So they are, said the Undertaker. They haven't no more philosophy nor political economy about them that, said the Beadle, snapping his fingers contemptuously. No more they have, inquired the Undertaker. I despise them, said the Beadle, growing very red in the face. So do I, rejoined the Undertaker. Now I wish we had a jury of the independent sort in the house for a week or 2, said the Beadle. The rules and regulations of the board would soon bring their spirit down for him. Let alone for that, replied the Undertaker, so saying he smiled approvingly to calm the rising wrath of the indignant parish officer. Mr. Bumble lifted off his cocked hat, took a handkerchief from inside the crown, wiped from his forehead the perspiration which his rage had engendered, fixed the cocked hat on again, and turning to the Undertaker, said in a calmer voice, Well, what about the boy? Oh, replied Carter, why, you know, Mr. Bumble, I pay a good deal towards that poor rates. Sir, well, replied the Undertaker. I was thinking that if I pay so much towards him, I've got to give him as much as one can, Mr. Bumble, so I think I'll take the boy myself. Mr. Bumble grasped the Undertaker by the arm and led him into the building. Mr. Rose closed with the board for 5 minutes. It was arranged that Oliver should go to him that evening upon liking, a phrase means, in the case of parish prentice, that the master find, upon a short trial, they can get enough work out of a boy without putting too much food in him. He shall have him for a term of years, to do what he likes with. When little Oliver was taken before the gentleman that evening, informed that he was to go that night as general house lad to the column makers, and that if he complained of his situation or came back to the parish again, he'd be sent to sea, they'd be drowned or knocked on the head, as the case might be. He had been so low motion that by common consent produced him a hardened young rascal and ordered Mr. Burns to remove him from it forthwith. Now, although it was very natural that the board of opium world should feel in a great state of virtuous astonishment and horror at the smallest tokens of wants of feelings on the part of anybody, they were rather out in this particular instance. The simple fact was that Oliver, instead of possessing too little feeling, possessed rather too much, and was in a fair way of being reduced for life to a state of brutal stupidity and sullenness by the ill uses he received. He heard the news of his destination in perfect silence, and had his luggage put into his hand, which was not ready to carry, as much as it was all compromised within the limits of a brown paper parcel, about half a foot square by 3 inches deep. He pulled his cap over his eyes, and once more attaching himself to Mr. Bumble's coat cuff, was led away by the dignitary to a new scene of suffering.
For some time, Mr. Bumble drew Oliver along without notice remark, for the beetle carried his head very erect, as a beetle always should be. And, it being a windy day, little Oliver was completely enshrouded by the skirts of Mr. Bumble's coat as they blew open and disclosed to great advantage his flapped waistcoat and drab plus knee breeches. As they drew near to their destination, however, Mr. Bumble thought it expedient to look down and see that the boy was in good order for made by his new measure, which he accordingly did with a fin coming great of Grace Barrett. Oliver, said Mr. Bumble. Yes, sir, replied Oliver in a low, tremulous voice. Pull that cap your eyes and hold up your head, sir. Although Oliver did what he was desired at once and passed the back of his unoccupied hand briskly across his eyes, he left a tear, and then when he looked upon his conductor, as Mr. Bumble gazed sternly upon him, it rolled down his cheek. It was followed by another and another. The child made a strong effort, but it was an unsuccessful one. Withdrawing his other hand from Mr. Bumble's, he covered his face with both, and went until the tears sprang up from between his chin and bony fingers. Well, exclaimed Mr. Bumble, stopping short and daring at his little charge a look of intense malignity. Well, of all the ungratefullest and worst disposed boys I ever see, Oliver, you are no, sir, sobbed Oliver, clinging to the hand which led the well. Okay, no, sir, I'll be good indeed, I will, sir. I'm a very little boy, and it is so what? Inquired Miss Bumble in amazement. So lonely, sir. So very lonely, cried the child. Everybody hates me, sir. Don't pray be cross to me. The child beat his hand upon his heart and looked at his companion's face with tears for agony. Mr. Bumble regarded Oliver's piteous and helpless look with some astonishment for a few seconds, hammered him 3 or 4 times in a husky manner. Never minding anything about the troublesome cough, bade Oliver dry his eyes and be a good boy. Then once more taking his hand, he walked out with him in silence. The undertaker, who had just put up the shutters of his shop, was making some entries in his day book by light of the most appropriate dismal candle when Mr. Bumble entered. Ah, said the undertaker, looking up from the book and pausing a word. Is that you, Bumble? No one else, Mr. Sorbury, replied the beadle. Here, I brought the boy. Oliver made a bow. Well, that's the boy, is it? Said the undertaker, raising the candle above his head to get a better view of Oliver. Mr. Sorbury, will you have the goodness to come here a moment, my dear? Mr. Sorbury emerged from a little room behind the shop and presented the form of a short, thin, squeezed-up woman with a vixenish countenance. Excuse me. Okay, let's go.